Hi, you're listening to Great Work, a podcast about serenity and success, doing work that matters to you and to the world, by me, Adam Sandel. This week, get more done and do better work by working less hard. This is one of the longer ones. Put your feet up. Things that sound too good to be true usually are, but it's beyond doubt that most of us can get more done, do it better, and be happier by working less hard, if we go about it in the right way. And it's life-changing, and potentially life-prolonging too, in the email version I've linked to research showing that. Skeptical that you could work less hard and get more done better? Well, let's start with the evidence. The standard Western working week, 5 working days and a weekend, evolved in the UK and the USA from 6 working days in the 19th and 20th centuries, when Saturday's Jewish Sabbath, Shabbat, was glued to the front of Christians' day of rest on Sunday. What if our days off were to multiply again? What if people worked 4 days a week instead of 5? Well, they'd get 20% less done, businesses would be less profitable, organisations less effective. Or people would cram the same number of working hours into 4 longer days. Except there is abundant evidence that none of these things happens. Instead, something magical occurs. The organisation 4-Day Week Global and others have carried out trials of 4-day working weeks involving thousands of workers in organisations of various sizes, commercial and non-profit, around the world. To be clear, full-time workers in these trials switch from 5 working days a week to 4 8-hour days of work a week, but their pay isn't reduced. Why on earth would an employer sign up for that? Well, here's what happens. Business revenues increase substantially. Staff hiring increases and staff turnover decreases. Workers love it and see improvements ranging from mental health to sleep to the culture and sense of purpose at work. People use their extra day off not to take on other work, but for hobbies and leisure, housework and caring and personal maintenance. Everyone's lives improve. Women's even more than men's. Childcare is dramatically easier, and the vast majority of the participating employers like it so much that they decide to continue with a 4-day working week after the trial ends. In a number of other trials, the results have been similar. One run by the Icelandic national government and Reykjavik City Council was so successful that it resulted in major changes to work contracts in Iceland. There's also good evidence that shorter working weeks are better for the climate, less commuting for a start. Here's a participant in one of the 4-day week trials. When you realise that day has allowed you to be relaxed and rested and ready to absolutely go for it on those other 4 days, you start to realise that to go back to work on a Friday would feel really wrong, stupid actually. Over and over again, experiments like these have been successful. Consider this for a moment. In trials such as these, people did 1 day less of work every week, but were paid the same. Their days off increased by 50%, employers and workers were happier, and productivity increased. Not productivity per day worked, productivity overall. The question we should be asking isn't why employers would sign up to this, it's why on earth the 5-day working week is still the norm. I have a painful yearning that I could have learnt this and had the chutzpah to put it into practice when I was working full-time as a lawyer. With hindsight, it's easy to see how much happier and more productive I would have been. There's nothing new about this finding that a significant shift in the balance from work to rest would make us more productive. In the 1950s, Raymond Van Zelst and Willard Kerr surveyed their colleagues at the Illinois Institute of Technology about work habits and discovered that those who spent more hours in the office were less productive. They were responsible for fewer publications and inventions than their colleagues. The optimum was about 10 to 20 hours each week in their campus workplace. Were these people working at home? They were. And Van Zelst and Kerr investigated this too. They found a bell curve. Working at home for up to about 3.5 hours a day increased people's output, but beyond that, it reduced their productivity. We're going to come back to this bell curve. Let's appreciate the significance of what Van Zelst and Kerr found. It's not that if you do another hour of work each day, you won't be as productive during that hour, although that's true. The startling conclusion is that those who do an extra hour of work each day accomplish less overall than those who don't. Management consultancy is a notoriously always-on service. Like others who provide skilled professional services commercially, many management consultants cling to the belief that their clients expect their late-night emails to be answered straight away. An experiment at Boston Consulting Group, one of the big three US management consulting firms, required people to take regular scheduled time off. Now, you may share my concern about quite how well suited these people are to be telling anyone how to run an organization when you learn that part of the experiment was to require consultants to take just one scheduled night off a week. Quote, not even to check or respond to emails or other messages, end quote, after 6 p.m. on that single night. The partner in charge of the team involved in the first trial was worried about having to tell her client the mutinous news that each member of her team would be unavailable one night a week. But you may now not be surprised to learn their work improved, communication was better, and the team functioned more efficiently and effectively. The author of a wonderful book called Rest, Alex Soojung Kim Pang, to whom I owe much of my thinking on this topic, looks at the optimum amount of work for getting great work done. One potent observation of Pang's is that many creative types who achieve greatness do so by working for around 4 hours a day. It's a peculiarly consistent figure. Pang considers Charles Dickens, 15 novels, 5 novellas, Alice Munro, Nobel Prize-winning writer, Ingmar Bergman, more than 60 films, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, another Nobel Prize for literature, Ernest Hemingway, and another Nobel Prize, Charles Darwin, an amazing intellectual legacy and 19 books, the influential doctor and medical educator William Osler, and Anthony Trollope, 47 novels. He wrote, all those, I think, who have lived as literary men, working daily as literary labourers, will agree with me that 3 hours a day will produce as much as a man ought to write. In 2 fascinating books by Mason Curry, sketching the working habits of several hundred great writers, musicians, artists, architects, and philosophers, the same picture emerges again and again, with plenty of exceptions. When Elon Musk tweeted that nobody ever changed the world on 40 hours a week, he didn't have the slightest clue what he was talking about. Now, for some, it's clearly possible to do great things while working ludicrously longer hours. And with the exception of Alice Munro, I've just given you a list of men. A lot of these 4-hour days have a hard-working woman or several behind them. But to Pang's list, we could add Alice Walker of The Colour Purple, Victorian poet Elizabeth Barrett Browning, author Isabel Allende, and famously novelist and essayist Virginia Woolf, who describes her schedule, including 3 or 4 hours of writing in the morning, in her diaries and letters, and writes brilliantly of the importance of space, not just a room, but in your head, in her essay, A Room of One's Own. So we have to ask, are 4-hour days the cause of productive brilliance, or were their short days and success the consequence of their privilege? Did these luminaries work 4-hour days because they could, or did they do great work in part because they worked 4-hour days? It would be hard to set up randomized controlled trials to answer that question, but the message of research such as the Illinois Institute of Technology study, the belief of many who have experimented and done great work, and the experience of more ordinary folk like me who work on their creative or intellectual projects for a focused 4 hours a day is that they couldn't have achieved what they achieved any other way. But what about you? Novel writing may be far from the everyday grindstones at which most of us work, but if you've done hard mental work, studying something complicated, say, or research or writing, I'd be willing to bet that you weren't able to sustain it for more than 4 hours a day for long. Perhaps you felt guilty that you weren't doing the 8 or so hours a day that we typically consider to be a full working day. But you probably have got more done. You'd probably have got more done had you been more generous with yourself, focused for 4 hours, and then allowed yourself the rest of the day for guilt-free relaxation. This is all well and good for those with the luxury of spending 4 hours a day writing their novels before going for a restorative promenade around their landscaped country estates. But its relevance to the prosaic work that most of us spend our time doing, where the job has to get done and we're required to be on duty for long periods of time, how does that work? Well, let's go back to the Illinois Institute of Technology study and the bell curve that Van Zelst and Kerr discovered, showing the relationship between how many hours their colleagues worked and how productive they were. Recognizing that this is not just about time, but also about effort, we could generalize Van Zelst's and Kerr's bell curve. Now, I appreciate this doesn't work in a podcast, but stick with me and imagine a bell curve. On the horizontal or x-axis is effort. On the vertical, y-axis, is results. You know what a bell curve looks like. As effort increases, so do results, up to a point, and then they fall down the other side of the hill. And for this bell curve, imagine that its tails are below the horizontal axis. In other words, with almost no effort, or with a huge amount of effort, the results are negative. What's this curve telling us? It's saying that there is an optimum amount of effort, the top of the bell curve. Work harder and you'll achieve more only when you're to the left of that optimum effort. That's often where we assume we are, on the upslope on the left. I have so much to do, I won't have time for a break today. I may stay a bit late at work to try and clear my list. I'm going to have to take this piece of work home with me. I don't have time for a short walk to clear my head. I guess I'll have to come in for a bit at the weekend. And we do that because we think working harder will get more done. But as we've seen, that assumption is usually wrong. Many of us spend most of our time to the right of the peak, on the downslope. This is beyond the land of diminishing returns. We're in the quicksands of negative returns. If we're to the right and we double down, we'll make things worse. The implication of the 4-day week studies is that across a range of settings and in a number of countries, most of the time, most of us are to the right of the peak. We will get more done only if we take it easier. To complete the picture, the far left, the tail that dips into negative results, is so lazy that whoever's there is just getting in the way, making things worse than if they weren't there at all. And they're as much use as the person on the far right who's working so hard that their stress and the poor quality of their work cause more problems than they solved. If you've been working for a while, you may have met one of these individuals, but they're fairly uncommon. The low-effort one on the left can survive only in a seriously dysfunctional team. The high-effort one on the right usually burns out quickly. The other thing to note is that even on the upper reaches of the upslope, in other words, to the left of the peak, you're in the land of diminishing returns. More effort gets you less than it would if you were starting further to the left. The gradient as you approach the top, the optimum is getting shallower. Okay, I hope that description worked. I accept it is possible that not everyone enjoys holding images of graphs in their head as much as I do. So why is there this right side of the curve where working less hard results in more work done better? The short answer is obvious, that to do your best work and your most work, there's an optimum balance of work, rest and sleep, and all the other things we have to do in life. There's no bread without the rise. Work harder and you might get more done today, but it won't be great work, and in the longer run you'll function less well. So the amount you get done each day and the quality of what you do will decline. In a future podcast, we're going to look at the science explaining why rest and sleep, and also exercise when done right, bring such astonishing benefits to our work and our lives. What does all this mean for you? I am not suggesting you must, nor assuming that you could, work only 4 hours a day. Unless you're doing tough intellectual work, in which case you really shouldn't spend much more than 4 hours a day on those bits of your job. Nor necessarily am I suggesting working only 4 days a week. This advice isn't only for the Virginia Woolfses and the Charles Darwinses, nor is it about solely how many hours or days you work. Remember, we're looking at effort more broadly. When I was working as a barrister, a trial lawyer, I'd often anxiously over-prepare for court hearings and as a result perform less effectively than I'd have done had I taken it easier. And early in my career as a GP, when patients would show up with 8 things they wanted my help with, 7 of which they'd mention only in the 23rd minute of their 10-minute appointment, I'd try to deal with them all, and so do so badly, leaving my patients feeling rushed and dissatisfied. GPs in training are taught to deal with this common situation by making a list and prioritising, booking a further appointment to deal with those problems for which there's insufficient time. I do a bit of that now, but have learnt that what usually matters most is simply to listen. Rarely is there a need to rush. Sometimes a list of problems is a sign of someone feeling out of control, unheard. When there is more to do, the listening earns enough trust to agree some measured, unstressed next steps. Do less, better. Now, journalists, lawyers, and some social workers may be able to compress what they currently do into fewer hours or days, and with clearer, more rested heads do it quicker and better. But what about teachers, nurses, librarians, and others whose jobs involve being on duty, doing the job between certain hours? It's subtler, but the 7 practical steps I'm about to offer you all apply. If part-time working is an option for you, we're going to consider new perspectives on that in a future podcast. And most important of all is to ensure your time away from work, enough of it, is truly restful and restorative. Another thing we're going to come back to in a future podcast. So here's where you start. It sets up a positive feedback loop, a virtuous cycle. You get better at playing this game, your perspective shifts, you prioritize better, you get more rest, you become more efficient. A, pay attention to where you are on your efforts results curve. It's probably to the right of where you think you are. Most of us move to the right as the working day goes on. An awareness of where you are allows you to make better decisions about how to use your time. The best place to be is on the upslope, not at the top. On the upslope, you have some unused capacity. At the top, you have none. And serenity and success don't require you to maximize results all the time. B, take breaks whenever you can, especially when you feel tired or aren't performing optimally. Several times a day. There's nothing work shy about this. It's a skilled strategy for getting more done and doing better work. C, break well. The effects of a walk, ideally in fresh air, even for just a couple of minutes, can be astonishing. D, allow yourself, when appropriate, to do a quick and dirty job of things. Distinguish between those things that need to be done perfectly and those that don't. You may, as a result, do things better than you would have done had you been meticulous. E, stop working when your working day should end. Now, I used to follow a different rule, do today's work today. I'd leave work only once I'd finished everything that could be finished that day. This is easier done with work like much of mine, when each quantum of work is short, rarely as a GP working on a project for weeks or months. I believed in that because I'd leave without work hanging over me, without the temptation to do more when I got home. When I can, I still do that. But often now, after I've seen my last patient of the day, I find myself battling clinical admin, and it takes an age to get through it. If I leave it, rest, sleep, and return to it the next working morning, it takes my clearer head moments to bash through it. Tired? Stop working if possible, or at least switch to something different and come back to it when you're going to do it more efficiently. F. Structure your day wisely if you can. Include into unavoidably long days, at the times when you'll most need them, activities that are restful, that are lower paced, or that stretch you in different directions. We'll return to this too. G. Consider working fewer hours if you can. If you're working a lot of hours, And we know from the 4-day week and Illinois Institute of Technology studies that a lot of hours a week probably includes anything north of the low 30s per week. Then you are likely to get more done and do it better if you cut down your hours. If you can make that decision, try it. If you need to persuade the boss, suggest a trial. You could point them to 4-Day Week's website or to this podcast or its email version. Organizations that try shorter working weeks rarely revert to the bad old days. That's this week's topic, but if you're interested in more on this, I'd really recommend Alex Soojung Kim Pang's book Rest: Why You Get More Done When You Work Less. Another book on the same topic, perhaps particularly useful for creative types and academics, is Cal Newport's recent Slow Productivity: The Lost Art of Accomplishment Without Burnout. There are more podcasts to come. At the moment, I'm recording these podcast versions of emails that I've sent out in the weeks gone by. But do sign up or follow this podcast if you're interested in more. There's going to be plenty more like this.